Daniel Whitmore thought he understood his marriage. He thought he knew exactly why it was ending. He didn't know that in the next 40 seconds, standing in a hallway he'd walked 1,000 times, he would hear the truth that unraveled everything he believed about the woman he was preparing to leave. Within 1 week, he would tear up divorce papers he'd already signed with his own hand. But first, he had to hear it. He had to stand very still, and he had to listen. And he had to let a single conversation take a hammer to the entire story he had built inside his head. If you've ever discovered that the story you were living was not the story that was actually happening, stay with me until the very end, because tonight I'm going to show you exactly how a man almost destroyed the best thing in his life over a misunderstanding he never bothered to question. And before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Hit that subscribe button, because this one has a turn you won't see coming, and I promise you'll want to be here when it lands. Let me take you back to the beginning of the end. Daniel was 41 years old, an architect who had spent 18 years quietly building a reputation, and, though few people knew it, a considerable fortune. He was not a loud man. He wore the same 3 suits in careful rotation, drove a 9-year-old sedan with a small dent in the rear bumper he'd never fixed, and let people assume he was comfortable rather than wealthy. Comfort was a word he liked. It asked nothing of anyone. It made no promises it couldn't keep. He had grown up watching his father demand admiration he hadn't earned, and Daniel had decided long ago that he would rather be underestimated than exposed. So, he built his life the way he built his buildings, from the inside out, with the strongest parts hidden, where no one could see them. His wife, Claire, was 38. They had been married for 12 years. And, for the last 2 of those years, something had been going wrong that neither of them seemed able to name. She grew quiet where she had once been warm. She stayed late at the hospital where she worked as a nurse, then later still. And she stopped asking about his projects. He stopped offering to tell her. The silence between them thickened until it had weight, until it filled rooms before either of them entered, until they moved around each other in their own home, like 2 people sharing a hallway in a building neither of them owned anymore. Daniel did what a certain kind of man does when he feels a thing slipping. He tightened his grip on everything except the thing that mattered. He worked more. He came home later. He told himself he was giving her space, when really he was giving up. And somewhere in that long, slow surrender, he reached a conclusion that felt less like a decision and more like an admission. Claire no longer loved him. She had checked out. She was. He was almost certain, staying only out of guilt or inertia or the fear of what people would say when a 12-year marriage finally cracked in half. The evidence had piled up in the quiet way that evidence does when a man has already decided on the verdict and is only looking for confirmation. The distance, the late nights that stretched past midnight. A phone she now kept face down on the kitchen counter, screen hidden, buzzing with messages she never mentioned. The way she flinched, just slightly, when he asked where she'd been, as if the question itself were an accusation. And most damning of all, a single overheard fragment of a phone call 3 weeks earlier, when he'd come home unexpectedly and caught her standing at the window with her back to the door, saying, in a low, strained voice, "I can't tell him. Not yet. It would destroy him." Then she'd heard the floor creak, turned, seen him in the doorway, and ended the call so fast the phone nearly slipped from her hand. He had turned that sentence over in his mind for 21 days. It would destroy him. What would? An affair, surely. A man at the hospital. Some doctor with steady hands and easy confidence. A decision already made and merely waiting to be delivered. He built a whole future out of that one broken sentence, the way he built houses out of a single sketch on a napkin. And the future he built was a house with only one person living in it, walking through empty rooms at night. So, Daniel had done the thing he never imagined he would do. He had contacted a lawyer quietly, a man from his university years, who owed him a favor, and asked no questions. He'd had the papers drawn up, and he had told himself the entire time that he was simply protecting his dignity, getting ahead of the inevitable, refusing to be the last one standing when the music stopped and everyone turned to stare. He would present the papers, they would divide their shared life into two smaller lives, and he would walk away with his pride intact. That was the plan. That was the story he told himself, and he told it well, because he had a great deal of practice telling himself comfortable things and mistaking them for the truth. He had never once, in 21 days, simply crossed the room and asked her what was wrong. The day everything changed was a Thursday in late October. The kind of gray, low-skied afternoon that seems to hold its breath when the light never quite arrives and the whole world feels like it's waiting for news. Claire's younger sister, Megan, was visiting from out of state, staying in the guest room down the hall. Daniel liked Megan. She was sharper than Claire, quicker to anger, quicker to laugh, harder to fool. If anyone on this earth knew the true state of his marriage, it would be Megan. She and Claire told each other everything. They always had, since they were girls, sharing a bedroom and a single secret diary between them. The divorce papers sat in a manila envelope in Daniel's briefcase in the study, waiting like a loaded thing. His plan was simple. That evening, after Megan left the next morning, he would ask Claire to sit at the kitchen table. He would slide the envelope across the wood, the same table where they'd eaten 1,000 ordinary dinners. He had rehearsed the words until they'd gone smooth and lifeless in his mouth. I think we both know this hasn't been working. I think it's time we were honest with each other. He'd come home early that Thursday to prepare himself, to sign his own copy, the final signature, so that when the moment came, there would be no hesitation, no chance to lose his nerve at the kitchen table with her eyes on him. He'd gone into the study, taken out the papers, uncapped the fountain pen she had given him for his 40th birthday, an irony he did not let himself feel. His signature was neat and architectural, the same signature that had approved 100 buildings across 3 states. He signed the first page. He signed the second. His hand did not shake. He was proud of that. Later, in a bitter and ashamed way, that his hand had not shaken while he ended his marriage. Then he heard Claire's voice drifting down the hall from the kitchen. She was talking to Megan, and she was crying. Daniel set down the pen. He should have announced himself right then. A better man might have called out, made a sound, given them warning, but he was not, in that moment, a better man. He was a frightened one, and frightened men listen at doors. He rose quietly from the desk and walked to the study doorway, and from there, through the open kitchen entrance, 20 feet down the hall, he could hear every word as clearly as if he were standing in the room with them. "I can't keep doing this," Claire was saying, her voice cracked and thin, a voice he hadn't heard from her in years, pretending everything is fine, watching him look at me like I'm a stranger who wandered into his house by mistake. "Then tell him," Megan said. "For God's sake, Claire, just tell him. Whatever it costs, it can't cost more than this. You don't understand." A long, shuddering breath. "You don't know what he's been through. His father, his whole childhood, all of it. Do you know what he told me on our 3rd date? We were sitting in the car outside my apartment, and he said he could handle anything at all, except being pitied. He said pity was worse than pain. He said he'd rather be left than pitied. He said it like it was a joke, but he meant it, Megan. I saw it in his face. I've never once forgotten it." Daniel stood very still in the doorway. His father, his childhood, things he had told Claire in the dark, years ago, in the early weeks, when love makes you brave enough to hand someone your worst wounds, things he had assumed she'd forgotten or filed away somewhere unimportant. She had not forgotten. She had built her entire silence around them. "So what?" Megan said. "Gentler now. You just carry this alone? Forever? That's exactly what I've been doing." Claire's voice dropped, and Daniel had to hold his breath to hear it. 8 months, Meg. 8 months of doctor's appointments I schedule for my days off so he won't notice a thing. 8 months of telling him I'm working late when the truth is, I'm sitting in a parking garage crying in my car because I can't come home yet and let him see my face. Because if he sees my face, he'll know. Something cold moved through Daniel's chest, slow and total, like water filling a basement. The oncologist called it stage 1, Claire went on, caught early. They keep using that word, optimistic, over and over, like if they say it enough, it'll be true. The surgery went well. The treatment is working. My last scan was clear. Megan, it was clear. I should be happy. I am happy. I swear I am. But then I look at Daniel across the dinner table, and I know that the second I tell him, the second he finds out, everything changes forever. He stops seeing his wife. He starts seeing a patient. He starts hovering and worrying and pitying, and I'll lose him. Anyway, just slower, just sadder, just one careful, gentle inch at a time, until there's nothing left of who we were. The manila envelope was still in Daniel's hand. He did not remember picking it back up from the desk. His fingers had gone numb around the edges of it. "That's insane," Megan whispered. "Claire, that's not fair to him. That man loves you. Anyone with eyes can see it, does he?" "Sss." Claire laughed, a wet, broken sound that hurt to hear. "He's barely spoken. A full sentence to me in 3 weeks. He comes home after midnight. He looks at his phone more than he looks at me. I think—" Her voice failed her completely, then dragged itself back. "I think he's already gone, Meg. I think I waited too long being brave, and he gave up on me while I wasn't looking. And the worst part, the part I can't say out loud to anyone but you, is that I did it to protect him. I stayed distant so he wouldn't ask questions. I lied about the late nights so he wouldn't offer to come to the appointments and see the machines and the needles and the fear on my face. I built a wall between us to keep him away from a truth I was sure would break him. And the wall worked. It worked so well that I lost him behind it. Daniel stood in the hallway of the house. He had built his entire adult life inside, and he understood in a single collapsing instant that he had gotten everything wrong. Every single thing, not one detail spared. The late nights were not an affair. They were a woman crying alone in a concrete parking garage, so her husband would never have to see her afraid. The phone kept face-down held appointment reminders and lab results and midnight searches he could only begin to imagine. The flinch when he asked where she'd been was the flinch of someone guarding a secret built entirely to spare him. And the sentence, the one that had haunted him for 21 days and nights, "I can't tell him, it would destroy him," had never once been about another man. It had been about a diagnosis, about cancer, about her absolute certainty that his love was too fragile a structure to survive the weight of the truth. She had spent 8 months carrying the heaviest thing a human being can carry, and she had carried it entirely alone because she believed he was too weak to help her hold it. And the terrible thing, the thing that dropped Daniel to one knee in the hallway with his palm pressed flat against the wall to keep from falling, was that he had proven her exactly right. He had answered her distance, not with concern, but with withdrawal. He had met her secret suffering with cold suspicion. He had gone to a lawyer behind her back. He had signed the papers with a steady hand. He had, in every single way that mattered, become precisely the man she had been so afraid he was. He looked down at the envelope, at his own neat, confident signature on the pages inside it, and a wave of shame passed over him, so complete, so total, that for a long moment he genuinely could not draw breath. He did not go into the kitchen. Not then. He was not ready, and more than that, in some deep and instinctive way, he understood that walking in now, revealing that he'd overheard every word, would only confirm her worst and oldest fear. She would see his face change in real time. She would watch the pity arrive in his eyes like weather. He would take from her the one thing she had fought 8 brutal months to protect, the ability to be seen as a whole person and not as a diagnosis with a name attached. So he did something far harder. He backed silently down the hall, one careful step at a time, into the study, and he closed the door with the softest click a door can make. And then he sat down in the dark, in the chair where he'd signed away his marriage 20 minutes earlier, and he made a decision that had nothing at all to do with signatures. He would not tell her that he knew, not yet. Instead, he would show her, day by day, hour by hour, that the man she had married was not the man she feared he had become. He would tear down the wall she'd built, not by demanding to be let in, but by giving her, without a single word of explanation, every reason on earth to trust him again. Twice. He would become worthy of the truth before he ever admitted he already held it. That night, after the house had gone quiet and Claire and Megan had gone to bed, Daniel took the manila envelope and the signed papers inside it, and he fed them one page at a time into the shredder beside his desk. He watched his architectural signature turn to thin white ribbons. He felt, for the first time in months, something other than cold certainty settling in his chest. He felt purpose. He felt like a man who had finally been handed the right blueprint after building for years from the wrong one. The next morning, he was up before Claire. He made coffee the way she liked it, which he'd somehow forgotten, and had to stand in the kitchen, thinking hard to remember. A little cinnamon, too much milk. When she came into the kitchen, wary and hollow-eyed and braced for another silent day, he set the cup down in front of her and said simply, "I've been a terrible husband lately. I'm sorry. I'm going to do better." And he watched confusion move across her tired face, and underneath it, something she quickly hid before it could show. Hope, maybe, or the fear of hope, which is so often worse, because hope is the thing that can be taken from you twice. He didn't work late that day. He called his firm and cleared his afternoon and drove home at 4 o'clock through the gray light. And when Claire arrived from a long shift, exhausted down to the bone, he had dinner already cooking on the stove and the kitchen, warm with it. He asked her about her day, really asked, the way he hadn't in 2 years. And when she gave him the practiced deflection, oh, the usual, long. He didn't push, and he didn't retreat. He just stayed near her. He sat with her on the couch and watched a genuinely terrible movie, and let his shoulder rest lightly against hers, and he felt her, over the slow course of 2 hours, cautiously, disbelievingly, begin to lean into him. The days that followed became a quiet campaign of return. He noticed things again, things he had trained himself to stop seeing. He noticed that she was tired in a specific way, a bone-deep, cellular way, and that she took a small handful of pills each morning she thought he wasn't watching. He noticed a faint mark near her collarbone. He had never let himself register before. The thin line of a port scar. He noticed the pamphlet she'd forgotten in her coat pocket, the one from the hospital's oncology wing, and one quiet afternoon, while she slept on the couch, he held it in his hands and read every single word, and then he put it back exactly where it had been, folded to the same crease, and he walked out to the garage where she used to cry. And he cried there himself, silently, and told no one. He read everything he could find about her illness, at night, on his phone, in the study with the door closed. He learned what the treatments did to a human body, and what the fear did to a human mind. He learned the recurrence statistics and the survival rates and the small, careful, hopeful language the doctors used to hold terror at a distance. He built, in the quiet architecture of his own understanding, a structure strong enough to hold everything she had been carrying alone. He prepared himself, deliberately and completely, so that when the moment finally came, when she chose to tell him herself, he would not flinch, would not hover, would not pity. He would simply be there, steady and unmoving the way a load-bearing wall is there, invisible until the day you need it, and then holding up the whole house. Megan noticed the change before Claire did. She cornered Daniel in the kitchen on the last morning of her visit, arms crossed, eyes narrowed to slits, and said quietly, "What is going on with you?" "I'm trying to be a better husband," Daniel said. Megan studied him for a long, searching moment. She was sharp, sharper than her sister in some ways, and something in his face gave him away before he could arrange it. "You heard us," she whispered, her hand rising to her mouth. In the kitchen, that day. "You heard everything." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence was the whole confession. "You have to tell her," Megan said, low and urgent. "Daniel, you can't just pretend you don't know. That's not fair to either of you. If I tell her I overheard, she'll feel exposed, ambushed, robbed of the choice," he said. "And worse than that, she'll always know I only came back because I found out she was sick. She'll spend the rest of our marriage wondering whether I'm here out of love or out of duty, and she'll never be able to tell the difference. And neither will I." He shook his head slowly. "I won't do that to her. So I'm going to give her time. I'm going to become the kind of man she can tell. And when she tells me, when she chooses to, on her own, I'll be ready, and she'll never once have to doubt why I stayed." Megan's eyes filled and spilled over. She had come to this house, believing her sister's husband had quietly given up on her. She was leaving it believing something else entirely. "Don't take too long," she said, pulling him into a hard hug at the door. "She's tired, Daniel. She's been strong for so long. She's forgotten how to be anything else. She needs to be able to put it down." "I know," he said into her shoulder. "That's what I'm doing. I'm building her somewhere to put it down." 3 weeks passed. The house that had held its breath for 2 long years began, slowly, to exhale. Claire laughed again, one evening, a real laugh, sudden and surprised, at something stupid Daniel said over dinner, and the sound of it stopped them both. She started coming home on time. She stopped keeping her phone face down on the counter, and when it buzzed one evening with a reminder that clearly read Oncology Follow-Up 9 a.m., and she realized in a frozen instant that Daniel had seen it too, she went rigid, waiting for the question, the pity, the whole careful world she'd built collapsing at last. He simply said, without looking up from his plate, "Do you want company, or would you rather I not make a thing of it?" She stared at him across the table. "What? Whatever you've got going on," he said gently, meeting her eyes now. "Whenever you're ready to talk about it, if you ever are, I'm right here. And if you're not ready, that's fine too. Not going anywhere, Claire. I just need you to know that. I'm not going anywhere." The mask she'd worn for 8 months trembled at its edges, and then, for the very first time, it began to slip. Not that night. She wasn't ready that night, and he didn't ask her to be. But the possibility of it had arrived in the room and sat down with them, and Claire carried it with her afterward the way you carry the knowledge that a door you thought was locked forever has quietly been left standing open. It was a Sunday when she finally told him they were sitting out on the back porch, wrapped in wool blankets against the cold, watching the last leaves of the year come loose and spin down into the yard. She was quiet for a long time, so long he thought the moment had passed, and then she said, without looking at him, her breath clouding in the air, "I have to tell you something. And I need you to promise me you won't look at me differently after. Promise me." "I promise," Daniel said. "8 months ago, I found a lump." Her voice was steady. Then it wasn't. Then she gathered it back up and made it steady again. She told him all of it. The diagnosis in the cold examination room, the surgery, the long weeks of treatment, the clear scan. She couldn't quite let herself believe. The parking garages and the tissues and the mascara she reapplied before coming home, the lies about working late, the wall she'd built brick by careful brick, and exactly why she'd built it. She told him she'd been terrified he would pity her, that he would stop seeing his wife and start seeing a sick woman he was obligated to care for, that he'd stay out of duty, and she'd never once be able to tell the difference. She told him she'd been so busy protecting him from the truth that she'd almost lost him to the silence instead, and Daniel did the single hardest thing he had ever done in his life. He listened to a story he already knew, every beat of it, every turn, and he let it be brand new. He let her tell it. He did not say, "I already know." He did not steal from her the act of finally, after 8 months of solitary confinement, setting the whole weight of it down on the table between them. He held her cold hand in both of his, and he let her put it down, piece by piece by piece, until it was all out in the open air between them. No longer a wall, no longer a secret, just the truth, finally shared. When she finished, she turned and looked at him, braced with her whole body for the pity she'd spent 8 months dreading. It didn't come. "Thank you for telling me," he said quietly. "That must have been the loneliest 8 months of your entire life." She broke. Then, all at once, everything she had held so carefully for so long came pouring out in great heaving sobs, and he gathered her in and held her through all of it. And he did not hover, and he did not try to fix it, and he did not pity her. He just held on. And Claire, who had been strong entirely alone for so long she'd forgotten there was another way, was finally, at last, allowed to be weak in the arms of someone who would not love her 1 ounce less for it. Much later, when the crying had passed and the light was nearly gone from the sky, she said, her voice raw, "You changed weeks ago, before I ever told you. Why?" And Daniel, who had promised himself he would tell her the whole truth the moment she told hers, took a slow breath. "Because I heard you," he said, "in the kitchen with Megan. I wasn't supposed to. I'd come home early that Thursday, and I heard everything, every word, and I understood in about 4 seconds how badly I had gotten all of it wrong. I thought," he stopped and made himself finish, "I thought you were leaving me. I thought there was another man. I'd had papers drawn up, Claire, divorce papers. I signed them the same afternoon. I heard you tell your sister the truth." Her eyes went wide in the dark. "I shredded them that same night," he said. "Every page. And I've spent every single day since then trying to become the man you should have been able to tell in the first place. I didn't say I knew, because I couldn't stand the thought of you spending 1 second of the rest of your life wondering whether I came back for the right reasons. I wanted to earn it. I wanted, when you finally told me, for you to be telling a man who was already all the way home." For a long moment, Claire said absolutely nothing. She looked at her husband as though she were seeing him for the first time in years. "And perhaps she truly was. You were going to leave me," she said slowly, wonderingly, "and instead you taught yourself how to stay." "I was a coward," he said. "I met your silence with more silence. I saw you pulling away, and instead of asking you why, even once, I decided I already knew the answer. I was so terrified of being the last to know that I made myself the last to understand. You built a wall to protect me, and I stood on my side of it and called it proof that you'd stopped loving me. I'm ashamed of that, Claire. I think I'll be ashamed of it for the rest of my life. But I've decided that shame can be useful if you let it teach you something. And it taught me the only thing that ever really mattered, that love isn't the absence of hard things. It's showing up for them over and over, especially when it's terrifying." They sat with that for a long while. The last leaf fell. The cold deepened around them, and neither of them moved to go inside, because inside was where the silence used to live. And out here, in the dark and the cold, they had found their way back to each other at last. The scan the following spring was clear again, and the one after that was clear too. The doctors kept using their careful, hopeful word, optimistic, and slowly, month by month, it began to feel less like a wish held out at arm's length, and more like a simple fact of their lives. Claire went back to being fully, completely herself, the old warmth returning to her in stages, like a house being reopened room by room after a long winter of shuttered windows and dust sheets. And Daniel kept the shredded papers. He had swept the thin ribbons of them out of the bin the very next morning before Claire woke, and he kept them in a small glass jar on the shelf in his study, where he could see them every single day, not as a wound to pick at, as a reminder of the marriage he had very nearly thrown away because he had trusted his own fear more than he had ever trusted his wife. A reminder of the 40 seconds in a hallway that saved his life, though at the time he had believed he was only overhearing the end of it. People asked him, sometimes years later, how they had ever survived it all. The illness, the distance, the long, unbearable silence, and Daniel always gave them the same answer. "We almost didn't," he would say. "I was about to sign the papers. I had signed them. And then I overheard my wife telling her sister the one single thing I had never once thought to simply ask her. And I realized the story I'd been living inside my own head wasn't the story that was actually happening. It never is. You know, there's always another story running underneath the one we tell ourselves. The trick is to ask before you assume. The trick is to knock on the door before you decide what's waiting behind it. So let me leave you with this tonight. The people closest to us are so often carrying things we cannot see, weights they hide behind ordinary faces at ordinary dinners. And when they pull away from us, it is not always rejection. Sometimes the distance itself is a kind of love, misguided and clumsy and heartbreaking, a wall built out of fear to protect us from a truth they've convinced themselves we're too fragile to hold. And the greatest gift we can ever give the people we love is not to be strong enough to fix their pain. It's to be steady enough and safe enough that they can finally set it down in front of us. Daniel almost lost everything he had because he mistook his wife's fear for her betrayal. Please don't make that same mistake. When someone you love goes quiet, don't fill that silence with your worst assumptions. Fill it with a single question. Ask them. Just ask. Have you ever discovered that you had completely misread someone you loved? That the story you were telling yourself about them was nothing at all like the truth? Tell me in the comments below because I read every single one of them, and while you're there, let me know where you're watching from tonight. If this story moved you, give it a like so it can reach someone out there who needs to hear it, and subscribe because I have more stories exactly like this one coming very soon. Take care of the people you love. And when in doubt, knock on the door before you decide what's behind it. You just might save everything.